Okay, in case you don't know, I'm John Sander. I'm a longtime member of ADK. I'm a former hike leader, and I stopped hiking, or being a hike leader, because I became so involved with a website. The website evolved from a series of fishing guides that I published back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. The books are called Sander's Fishing Guides, and they were very successful. They're essentially the Bible of fishing in Western and Central New York. But while I was working on these books, I became exposed to a lot of things besides fishing. I really enjoyed the hiking that was involved when I had to do research for the streams. I was seeing all kinds of birds, lots of plants, an amazing array of insects, and that actually pulled my focus away from the fishing. So now I'm trying to be a little more well-rounded, and the website initially is going to be primarily about fishing, but not solely about fishing. And because it's a website, I can always update it, and it will continually grow until I have as much information on hiking, birding, etc., as I do on fishing. So just going down the list, I'm a writer and publisher. I have been for 40 years. I'm a former senior editor at Ecology and Environment, a late great environmental company that taught me a lot about how to do desktop research, because that's how all of our reports started. They started with desktop analysis, and then we would send field crews out, and I learned from working with these crews how to start a project like this and build it from the top down. I'm also a Cornell certified master naturalist. I'm only level 2, but I'm still working on it. Eventually I will get to level 15 or 16. Like it says, I'm a former and future ADK hike leader. I love leading hikes. I truly do. And it's something that I miss, but I really had to step back so I could focus on this big project, on all these amazing things that are out in Western New York. Now, like I said, I have a huge website, and just to give you an idea on how big this website is, I've traveled over 26,000 miles doing research. This is not going to the supermarket or to the gas station. This is just working on this website. 26,000 miles. That's more than 1,000 miles longer than the circumference of the planet, and it's all in Western New York. I never got further than the eastern suburbs of Rochester, or further south than the state line of Pennsylvania. It's all in here. And I loved every mile of it. I took so far it's just over 25,000 photographs, and I loved every minute of the work that I do. I spend most of my time in the winter in front of a computer, pulling all of my information together and putting it on this website. It's got to be prepped. There's a lot of post-production and photographs. There's a lot of information that needs to be cross-checked and added to. I cannot see everything when I go out. For instance, if I go to a place called Saunier State Forest, which you're going to see, I have to read certain things about that forest. I cannot learn everything just by field trips on my own. Now, there are basically 3 ways that you can go out and find places, and it's sort of what this presentation is about. 3 quick ways that you can find things. The hardest way, and it's a way that many people do it, is they just get in their car and drive. And that's how I started out. I would just get in my car and drive around, and if I saw something interesting, I'd note where it was. I would get as many photographs as I could, and then I would start calling people. I would call the DEC, I would call county offices and such. And that's how I started writing my first fishing guide. Well, it was hard, and eventually, especially working with the people from Ecology and Environment, I learned that a better way to do that is to start with a desktop analysis. Desktop analysis always starts with a literature review. There's a lot of information out there, both in hard copy books and on the internet, and you gather as much of the relevant information from that source as you can. And you need to store that someplace. You grab the relevant information. I have specialized files on my computer where I have all this information, just page after page after page of information. I have hundreds and hundreds of tape recordings of conversations with professional biologists and people that are avid fishermen. Anybody that I think can help me gather information and provide useful information for a website, I'm willing to talk to. Now, if you take the desktop analysis, get all this information, then you can kind of tailor your trip so that when you get on the road, you're far, far more targeted, and that's far more productive. And it's a lot more fun because you're spending more time looking at things rather than trying to find things. So I've gotten to the point where I typically go out 3 to 4 days per week. Every one of my trips probably averages pretty close to 150 to 200 miles. And I will take, on an average day, probably well over 200 to 250 photographs. And I try to get photographs of everything that's around me. If I'm looking at, say, a wetland, I try to get pictures of the birds, the flowers, the insects. I try to find out if you have a wetland, there's got to be some kind of source for that water. I try to find where the water source is. Oftentimes I know ahead of time where it is because I've done my research and I know that it's a beaver dam has caused a backup of water, and that's what's causing this wetland. That's in places like Vandermark State Forest is where you're going to see a lot of that, or in Allegheny State Park. If you look at the main sections of Red House Brook, that used to be a great trout stream, no longer a great trout stream. It's now a great place for looking at birds and insects because the beavers have dammed it all up. It's beautiful, but it's not very good for fishing. So now that gets me to, well, let me go back to a couple of things with this desktop analysis. The DEC has a huge website. And I mean, it's something on the order of 60,000 web pages. It is the second most disorganized website that I've encountered. And I mean that. It is the second most. And I was so frustrated one day, I spent a half hour looking for a web page that I knew was there because I was there the night before. I could not find this page. I tried for a good half hour. In frustration, I called up the webmaster for the DEC in Albany. And I asked her, I said, why did you organize it like this? The search functions don't work properly. Your information is scattered in such a haphazard way. And she explained to me why they did it that way. It has to do with politics, as I expected. But she gave me a couple of clues on how to do things better that most people don't know about. And that helped a little bit, but still, I now have something like, 50 shortcuts on my desktop. When I get to a page where I know I need that information for something, whether it's about fishing or a wetland or a technical brief on trout stream surveys, that goes either into my bookmarks, or if it's something I need all the time, it goes onto my desktop because I just cannot deal with the DEC's website. And they are frustrated with it as well. I work with their field biologists all the time, and they are absolutely godsmacked angry with how that website is put together. But they do have a lot of good information. You have things like the DEC Environmental Resource Mapper. That can show you primarily where wetlands are, which is what I like to look at. Wetlands are a great source of diversity in the environment, and there are lots of them. And oftentimes they're on state property. And they're on state property for a reason, because the state wants to protect them. You also have a National Wetland Inventory Mapper, which is similar to the DEC's Environmental Resource Mapper, but it has federal delineations of wetlands based on federal guidelines. So between the two of them, you have access to hundreds of wetlands. When you're driving around, oftentimes you will see these wetlands on the side of the road, or you'll see them off in the distance, and sometimes you'll see a parking area. And if you see that parking area, pull over and try to figure out why the parking area is there, because oftentimes it will be a wetland that has been, it's still on private property, but it's a protected wetland. It might be part of a kind of a swap. when we have things like road construction, if you destroy a wetland, oftentimes the only way the DEC will allow you to do that is if you create a wetland someplace else of equal size. So oftentimes those are the wetlands that you'll see these overlooks for. A fairly well-known one is the Hinman Wetland Complex. If you go down to Ellicottville, and I'm sure many of you have been there, you're going to pass a big parking area just before you get to Ellicottville. And if you park there, you're going to overlook this wetland complex. You've got 3 or 4 big ponds and some wetlands connecting these ponds, and that's the Hinman Valley Wetland Complex. And that's why it's there. That was a swap, a trade when they were building the 219 project. They had to destroy some wetlands, and that was the only way they were allowed to do that. eBird is another great way to find new places to go. eBird is anybody here not familiar with eBird? Okay, eBird is a great place for people that like birding. And unlike fish are kind of constrained because they have to be in the water. Birds are everywhere, but they tend to congregate in specific areas. They like certain things, like belted kingfishers. You're never going to see them in any place that doesn't have water. They must be near water. Same thing with bald eagles, same thing with osprey. Other birds, they don't want to be near the water. They want to be in the meadows. So you can go to this big world, and it's literally a worldwide map, and zoom in on wherever you want to go. And you zoom into Western New York, and you see all these little map markers, and you can zoom in on them and hover your cursor over it, and it will tell you the name of that location. And you can click on that, and it will bring up a list of all the birds that have been seen in that location. And some of these lists are, the birds number literally in the hundreds. It's an amazing place. But what's good about that type of map is if you're looking for some place that is not in the literature, that is how you're going to find it, because these are really avid birders that are going out and they're identifying really rich locations for birding, and they post their sightings, whether they're visual sightings or they bird by hearing, which many good birders do. You'll get, you click on that and you can see that the birds that are there, you'll get a location. It's really quite an amazing utility. Don't forget about Google Maps and Bing Maps, with some caveats. Google Maps has more problems than I care to talk about. I have contacted them many, many times about how they name things. But the good thing about Google Maps is if I don't want to drive down to Andover, New York, to look at a stream and see what its surroundings are and how big it is, oftentimes I can zoom in and go down to street level with Google Maps. Can't do that all the time. Many of the roads, they just haven't traversed it. But that's why you go to Bing Maps, which is Microsoft's version of the same thing. Oftentimes, if Google doesn't do it, Bing will do it. So you get a good overlap. And oftentimes the photography with Bing is better than what you get with Google, although Google has stepped up quite a bit in terms of photography over the past 5 years. So those are some of the tools that you can use if you want to go out on your own and find places to investigate on your own. You can go to the state forest. Everybody should be going to state forest, but not all state forests are the same. Some are just tree plantations, others are extraordinary. I'm going to show you one in a moment. You take all these resources, you get in your car, you give yourself an itinerary, have a pretty good idea on how long it takes to get to certain locations, and you can have yourself an incredible day just going to a place that you've never been before. I like going places I've never been to. I do not like going to the same places. How many people like going to the same place every time you go hiking? The same place. Come on, everybody raise your hand. That's what I thought, but we do it. A lot. Everybody that I know, and this is, I've done this all. So you go someplace where you've been many, 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 many times, and after a while, it loses its aha-ness. But if you go to a place you've never been, and you know how to research that area, and you know what to look for, and you're not spending a whole lot of time trying to find it, you can have an aha moment every time you go out, without question. So some of the things you want to bring when you go out, make sure you have a cell phone, your camera. Make sure you have a camera because you're not going to remember these things, especially if you do it a lot. Bring a notebook. Binoculars, important because oftentimes birds they don't stick around, they like moving, and you're going to see far more birds with binoculars than with without them. A notebook and pen is important. You need to note what it is that you're doing and what you're photographing. Otherwise, these things just tend to blend, and you're going to forget about them. Don't forget your 10 essentials, and don't forget food and water. It's not that much. Most of these things can fit in a small backpack. Pam has the backpack, so I don't have to worry about it. Yeah. So, but my point is that there are many ways to go out and find new places that you've never been to without having somebody lead you. I'm more than willing to take people on hikes. I promise. All three of you are coming with us, okay? But to do it on your own or, with your spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, I cannot tell you the pleasure it can give you to do things like that. It may not be, you're not going to be walking 10 miles. You're not going to, get your 3,000 or 30,000 footsteps in on your Fitbit. Sometimes you're only going to walk maybe a quarter mile or a half mile. But you're going to enjoy it immensely. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that I've enjoyed. Has anybody here been to Cabot Pond? Cabot, C-A-B-I-C. It's in northwestern Cattaraugus County, not terribly far away. Has anybody been to Saunier State Forest? Has anybody ever heard of Saunier State Forest? No. Okay, so you've heard of it? Have you been there? Okay. Saunier State Forest is immediately the other side of Letchworth State Park, and I'm sure many of you have been to Letchworth State Park, so it's just another maybe 10-minute drive, and that's it. And it is breathtaking. So let me show you some of these photos. Okay, what's going on here? All right. Now I'm just going to basically click through these things. Cabot Pond Recreation Area. View, extra large. Okay, the only way you're going to know Cabot Pond, that you're at Cabot Pond, is by a single road sign. And this is on Route 353. If you miss the sign, you're going to see the pond on the side, but if you sneeze, you're probably going to get by it. But it's a beautiful place, and it's mainly known by people that fish, but the fishing is not terribly good. This is the pond here. This is 353. I don't know why they built this little pond here, but this is the pond. This is a wetland that is spectacular, and this is a parking area. So when you get to the parking area, never mind. No, there's nothing wrong. I have these organized in a different way on my website. This is fine. This is that small pond I just pointed out that's between Route 353 and Cabot Pond here. Now you can tell Cabot Pond, it's rather eutrophicated, but you still have some pretty deep water out in this central area here. You have some deep. It's eutrophicated means that it's very organically rich, and it's in effect it's over-rich, and it's actually filling in with dead plant life. Eventually, this will become a wetland, and at the rate that it's going, it's not going to take very long. Another 40 years, perhaps, and this will be mostly a wetland. This is what Cabot Pond looks like in the morning. I was fishing here with a friend of mine, and it's just a beautiful, quiet, peaceful place. But the peacefulness was interrupted by this guy right here and this guy right here. They are belted kingfishers, and belted kingfishers are extraordinarily territorial. You'll see that one bird that I pointed out in a moment. I think the best use of Cabot Pond really is for kayaking, not for fishing. The fishing, I've never caught anything sizable here, and I don't remember the last time anybody else did. But it's a wonderful place for kayaking. It's never really crowded. You might see 1 or 2 people there in an afternoon, but that's about it. Okay, my little friend here, remember I pointed out that little round pond that was kind of off by itself? He was on that berm that separates the 2 ponds. This is a baby woodchuck, and not afraid of me at all. Not in the least bit. I walked right up to him, took photos. I stood in front of him for probably 5 minutes as I was looking around. This is the wetland that I pointed out, and this is a spectacular place for insects, as all wetlands are, insects, birds, and flowers. It seems that everybody that goes to Cabot Pond, they look at Cabot Pond, they don't turn around to see this because this is directly behind them. And this, by the way, is what Cabot Pond is going to look like probably in about 40 years, unless they do something to it. These are arrowhead flowers, and it's hard to see, and maybe you can see it, but there's a bee here. These are very attractive to things like bees and wasps and hornets, and there's a dragonfly. This is a blue darter. This is the lion of a wetland. This is an extreme predator. This dragonfly eats 1/10 of its own weight in insects every day. Whenever I see cardinal flowers, I love taking photos of them. They're not that common. But oftentimes when you see cardinal flowers, they're often in an area where you find things like this. Lots of things like duckweed. And for some reason, they just never take good photos because of that. But this is the kind of environment they like. This is right along the edge of Cabot Pond. Joe Pyeweed, if you like, I like hunting for butterflies. Sometimes Pam and I will go out, and our intention is to go out and photograph butterflies. Sandy, you've done that with us, so has Sue. And an easy way to find butterflies.
If you want to use the mic, because the people in the back can't hear.
Is anybody having a problem hearing me? You sure? Okay. Because I can talk louder. Trust me. Are you sure? Yeah. Is it on? Says on. Oop. Here.
I don't have my
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll give in. Technology. All right. Whenever you're looking for butterflies, one of the things I always look for are Joe Pyeweed. These are butterfly magnets. In fact, there are places where I won't even look for butterflies. I will simply stand at a Joe Pyeweed and wait for the butterflies to come. They're that attractive. This is a northern pearly eye, and this is a fairly common butterfly, but it was the first one I'd seen at Cabot Pond. There's a small trail at Cabot Pond that runs along the hillside, and Pam and I hiked that trail only maybe for 10 minutes, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere, and it's very steep, but when we go back there, we're going to try to finish that trail, see what it goes to. You never know. You come to going around the next bend is always something to look forward to. So there could be something spectacular up in that woodland. These are Amanita jacksoni. They were along the trail. Pam took this photo. These are edible, but do not pick them because anything that has the name Amanita in it, you want to stay away from. And there are mushrooms that look a lot like this that are quite toxic. This isn't a very good photo, so I'm not sure what kind of bird this is, but I just wanted to get a picture of a bird that because there were a lot of birds in the trees that trail goes through, but this one was a little bit too far away, and the camera that I've got doesn't have a good zoom on it, but this is one of scores of birds that we saw going through there. Of course, they left as we were approaching them. This is a cedar waxwing. Now, when you park your car at Cabot Pond, you're going to be parked next to some apple trees, and this is what you're going to see in early August. There are many, many cedar waxwings in that area. Cedar waxwings, for some reason, really love water. If you go to the Allegheny River and you hike along the river, many times you'll see trees just filled with nothing but cedar waxwings. And of course, there's our goldfinch. They're everywhere. Well, they're not everywhere because I had a couple from Texas come up to me one day. I was up at Bond Lake and they said, "Oh my God, we saw a goldfinch. We've never seen one of those before. They're amazing." Well, yeah, we see them every day. This is the guy that I pointed out that interrupted everything when, you know, that nice peaceful setting with all the mist on the lake. This guy is very terrible. He won the fight. He and the other bird fought for about 10 minutes, and he chased the other bird out. Belted kingfishers are extraordinarily territorial, especially during their breeding season. So I suspect that his nest was very close to here. And this is not a bird that nests in trees. These guys, well, does anybody know why they have such a big beak? Anybody want to hazard a guess? It's not just to catch fish, because they plunge into the water and they spear fish. But this beak is used for something equally as important. It's a chisel. These birds their nests are burrows in the ground, and some of those burrows are 8 feet long. So they need a good, strong chisel to dig those tunnels. And that's why he's got such a prominent beak. It's not just for the fish. These osprey are on a nest directly across the street from Cabot Pond, kind of like where that circle area is, that little circle pond, directly across the street. And there is no question but that these birds eat a lot of the fish out of Cabot Pond, because 98% of their diet, if they're directly near water, 98% of their diet will probably be fish. And if not fish, frogs and snakes and things like that, or other birds. But I doubt they could catch a belted kingfisher, which are extraordinarily fast. Okay, that's it for Cabot Pond. Pam, how much time do I have?
Well, it's 7:15.
We can go right to, we can do this at 7:30.
Okay, great.
No more, you guys socialized when we were setting up the technology. So
Okay, I'm going to go.
we'll just go to 7:30 and roll right into the program.
I want to show you these photographs I took from Sonia State Forest, because it is a little bit of a drive. It's just the other side of Letchworth, but it's worth every mile. I'm going to show you primarily photos of plants, because this place, I was dumbfounded. It's like walking into someone's backyard garden. There are so many flowers here, if you go at the right time of year. So, well, let me, hang on here. Let's start with this. This is a map of Sonia State Forest from the DEC. Come on, you can do it. Okay. You really want to obey these gates here, because this is a correctional facility up here. But where you want to go, when you go to the state forest, this area in here, I've been all through here, this is not spectacular. There's a parking area right here, and there's a gate, and you walk down this trail. This trail is not from this point to this point. Now, I wanted to get down to the creek really quick. It took me 45 minutes to get down this little distance, because there were so many flowers. I had to stop and look around and take photographs of so many flowers that I'd never seen before. And then when I got down here, I spent probably 4 hours going through this area. Okay, now you're going to be familiar with many of these flowers, I'm sure, but some of them you may not be, so I'll just identify them. Does anyone know what a bloodroot is? Bloodroot used to be used to treat cancer, because it's the sap from the root is so caustic. They used to put it on cancers on people, on like skin cancers and things like that, because it would just eat it right out. It's like pouring muriatic acid on your skin. or worse, sulfuric acid. But the flowers are beautiful. This is some kind of a buttercup. I'm not sure, and I almost took this one out because it's kind of, well, didn't do anything for me. But these are Carolina beauties, and they are one of my favorite flowers in the springtime. And these were everywhere throughout that forest, in the sunny areas. Coltsfoot. I hate coltsfoot, but they're an invasive plant. It took me years to get them out of my backyard. A friend of mine said, coltsfoot are nice. They're a nice spring flower. Here, take some of these and put them in your garden. I almost killed them 5 years later. These, of course, are your blue violets, which look terrible in your lawn, but are beautiful in clusters in a state forest. These are the cutleaf toothwort. Pretty, but not spectacular. These are spectacular. I don't see these very often. These are Dutchman's breeches. And these were in a very, very unique area. These were next to a waterfall. And I suspect they were next to the waterfall because of the microclimate that the waterfall created. This is some type of anemone, but it's not open enough. I can't tell what it is. These are relatively rare. These are early meadow roof flowers. Now these are not flowers that have gone to seed. These are the male aspect of a flower. And these are stamen here. And you don't see these terribly often. This is, I think I've seen this twice. Early saxifrage. Oop. Hepatica, of course, are beautiful in any color. This is the waterfall. The microclimate created by the waterfall likely is the reason that those Dutchman's breeches were found only next to this waterfall. I looked for them everywhere else and I could not find them. This is a trail in Saunier State Forest. It's an old railroad bed and it's pretty level. You know, once you get down to the bottom, of course it's steep as you're going down the first part, but once you get down here, it's pretty level. It's fairly well used, mostly by people in Rochester. And on one side you have a hill that you do not want to climb up because it can be quite steep and unstable. And on the other side over here you have wetlands. And on the other side of the wetlands you have Keshiqua Creek. This is Keshiqua Creek. There are brook trout have been identified in this creek. Smallmouth bass have been identified here. This is not a place where I would go fishing, however. The population densities are way too low. But it makes for a nice creek walk in the summertime. Because this is a state forest, you're allowed to camp here. But there are rules. And one of the rules is you have to be at least 150 feet away from water. This campsite is not 150 feet away from water, but I can understand why they put it here because this spot is just drop dead beautiful. And they're not too far, they're a little too close, but not terribly too close, and it was clean. So I didn't have too much of a heartache about seeing this campsite here. The Keshiqua Creek goes through marine shale, and that marine shale is about 365 million years old. This used to be where we are now here in western New York. Back then was south of the equator and at the bottom of a shallow sea. And it was a warm sea. There was a lot of marine snow would fall down and accumulate as sediment on the bottom. And after many, many millions of years and a lot of pressure and heat, that marine sediment turns into shale and it records what was going on at certain points if you can cleave the shale. And these places here, some of these are worm tubes. You have a lot of marine worms back then and other emergent benthic creatures. Sometimes in this type of shale you'll find trilobites, crinoids and such. Very rarely do you find fish, but fish were Depending upon what part of the Devonian, if it was the early Devonian, you're not going to find any fish, but later in the Devonian, which is known as the era of fishes, you can find fish. We have fish fossils here of fish that are as big as at least as big as a Volkswagen. I found fossils of those fish in 18 Mile Creek down in Hamburg. This is a fossil of a plant frond, and the black is coal. This is actual carbon that was in that plant when it was alive, and it, fell to the bottom of the sea and got compressed and contained within the sediment, and pressure squeezed everything out, and just the only thing that was left was the carbon, which turned to coal. These are your white violets. White violets typically have a purple area right in here, but these were very, very faint. If I blew this up a lot, you'd actually see a little bit of the purple streaking in this one here, but otherwise these are almost pure white. Millipedes all over the place. Big millipedes. This one was probably 4 inches long. This is not easy to see. These are mating oil beetles. It's the male beetle on the top and the female on the bottom. Now, one of the plants that my wife loves is the red trillium. Red trilliums are not nearly as common as white trilliums. I'm not sure why, but they're not. And so it's unusual to see big clusters. Until I came to the state forest, the biggest cluster I'd ever seen was in Ilion Gorge out in Herkimer County. But this was spectacular because this cluster, this little grouping here, was part of this grouping here, and it was in this where I found the Dutchman's breeches. And the waterfall is just over here about 15 feet. Now, what was amazing about this cluster, you'd have to see this to believe it. Picture the hillside that this is going up, because I'm facing this thing. This is going up a hill. It went uphill a good 40 or 50 feet and extended for about 200 feet on either direction. That's tens of thousands of red trilliums all in one spot. I've seen the majority of the red trilliums I'm ever going to see in my lifetime at that spot. It was just stunning. And all these plants were in flower, they were in bloom. So I thought, Pam's got to see this. So I went home, and that was a Monday. Pam had to work Tuesday, so I said, okay, on Wednesday we're going to see the red trilliums. So we drove all the way out to Sonia State Forest. We walked down there. We got there. All the red trillium flowers were gone. All of them. They only last like 48 hours. Timing is everything.
John, do you want to take a couple questions? And then we have some prizes that we're
Oh,
going
yeah.
to give away.
Okay. At our last meeting, somebody said they were really interested in waterfalls. So I wanted to make sure I showed the waterfall that's on Keshikwa Creek. But I don't see that individual here today, unfortunately. But it's a beautiful place. I spent a lot of time, probably 45 minutes, in and around this particular waterfall because it was just, the day was beautiful, the scenery was beautiful, there was almost nobody there. In fact, when I was there, there was nobody there. It was the next time around when I took Pam to not see the red trilliums that there were a couple of other people. But this is just one of the things that would draw you to going back to the state forest. I think that might be it. In fact, it is. So that's it. That's my spiel. I want you to go out. Thank you. These places will not come to you. You have to go out and find them. And it's a lot of fun, but you know, it's more fun when you do it the right way. This thing's still on.
Keep it on, because I'll need it.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you ever see any otters?
Otter, yes. In fact, we did. Well, Pam saw it. It was down on, do you know where the state drainage ditch bypasses parts of Conewango Creek? Okay, Conewango Creek, there's it's a very complicated thing. I'd have to show you on a map, but it was on the very lower end of the state drainage ditch, next to a DEC parking lot. Pam saw an otter, and she saw it from the other side of the creek, so we went over to the other side of the creek, and there were otter tracks there, yes. Their numbers are increasing around here, very definitely.
You had a conversation with a family of
Beavers.
beavers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not otters. Those were beavers. That's a story. It's amazing. Beavers actually talk to each other. It really is amazing.
Porcupines? Porcupines?
I've never seen a live porcupine in New York State,
I have.
but I haven't.
Skiing, I was out skiing.
They're here. Any other questions, Sandy?
Oh, no, we saw porcupine on, up in the Adirondacks, coming out of Cranberry Lake area.
Yeah. Well, I've seen porcupine, the signs of porcupines,
It was very cool.
and I've seen dead porcupines, but I've never seen a live one here in Western New York. Any other questions, or are we ready for the general meeting?